Fawlty Towers is held up as one of the best sitcoms to ever emerge from the UK, despite having only a 2-series run. It told the story of a couple running a hotel and unsuccessfully trying to raise the tone of the establishment. And of course, since it was a sitcom, that goal is constantly stymied by an unending string of errors and difficulties. John Cleese played Basil Fawlty, the irascible and hot-tempered manager of the hotel, who manages to treat his guests as if they are an annoyance to him. But despite the success of the show and its status as one of the great sitcoms of all time, there's one scene John regrets in particular. In this video, we'll talk about what it is, and we'll go over some other interesting tidbits about Cleese and the show. So stay tuned as Facts First presents the controversial scene from Fawlty Towers he still regrets. Fawlty Origins. Fawlty Towers was oddly enough based on a true story of sorts. The lads in Monty Python stayed at the Glen Eagles Hotel in Torquay, Devon, and were equal parts shocked and amused by the rude hotel owner. The owner, Donald Sinclair, was apparently not happy that the group was staying at the Glen Eagles and ensured a fairly miserable stay for the comedy legends. But upon further investigation, the Monty Python actors discovered it wasn't just them. The waitress at the restaurant admitted to them that Sinclair was wholly unfit to be running a hotel, and he seemed to hate all the guests. After they finished filming in the area, John Cleese and his wife, Connie Booth, stayed longer, perhaps to simply observe Sinclair in his natural, if not uncomfortable, habitat. Cleese used Sinclair as a model for his character, Basil Fawlty, who appeared in another sitcom called Doctor in the House. Further intrigued by the character, Cleese and Connie decided to write a pilot featuring him. It would be set at the fictional Fawlty Towers Hotel, and Cleese would play the short-tempered and guest-hating Basil, while Connie would play one of his employees, Polly. And as they say, the rest is history. The offending episode. There's an episode of Fawlty Towers that's been removed from the BBC because of an offensive aspect, and that's the episode containing a scene that John Cleese now regrets. However, interestingly enough, the reasons it's banned and the reason Cleese regrets it are completely different. The BBC, like many other networks around the world, have taken to reviewing past content to make sure it holds up to the social and cultural standards of the modern era. And regardless of whether or not art needs to be re-examined in this way, it seems to be the modern trend. There's a general concern that historical attitudes towards things such as cultural intolerance, sexism, homophobia, etc. should be treated as outdated. And in an attempt to avoid being seen as insensitive to modern-day audiences, networks and the like are attempting to remove content that would be deemed offensive today. It's certainly a challenging ethical dilemma, since no one wants to air content that contains sexism, xenophobia, homophobia, and the like, but at the same time, those things were more accepted at the time older art was created. So it's a form of censorship, but perhaps a needed one. Regardless, the BBC has banned an episode of Fawlty Towers called The Germans. In it, Basil has a conversation with a hotel guest where he casually uses a racial slur for people of West Indian descent. At the time, this type of language was more commonplace, if not accepted, but through a modern-day lens, they're totally inappropriate. As such, the BBC has declared it unfit for air, and they removed it from their gold box set. As to whether they'll choose to reinsert it into the gold box set, the BBC said, quote, "We want to take time to consider our options for this episode." A decade prior, the BBC had aired it, but without the scene containing the slur. They said they'd done so with John Cleese's blessing as well. They put out a statement saying that due to changes in public attitudes, they wanted to put out a version of the episode more appropriate for families. John's regret. Amazingly, the scene with the slur about West Indian people is not the scene in the episode John regrets. Instead, it's a scene where he's trying to hang a large taxidermized moose head onto the wall of the hotel lobby. At first, he's halfway done hanging it when the phone rings. No one is around to get it, so he has to put down the moose head in frustration. It turns out to be his wife calling, and Basil gets quickly irritated that she's calling him to remind him of several tasks he needs to do at the hotel, and one of those was to hang the moose head. So naturally, he's frustrated that he was interrupted from hanging it just to get a reminder to do it. Later, when Polly and Manuel are in the lobby, Basil tries again to hang it up. In a series of classic slapstick moments, the moose comes crashing down on him, causing him to stumble, trip on the ground over Manuel, and have a flower pot come crashing down on him. It's a great example of John's dexterity and comedic timing for physical comedy. However, on the take they used in the show, the timing was a little askew. There's a moment when Basil steps down from a chair after hanging up the moose head, and obviously the head is meant to come crashing down onto his head. but the crew person handling that was about 1 second late with the cue. Not a huge mistake, but enough so that Cleese has to wait for an extra second during his move away from the wall. When you watch the scene now, you can clearly see how Basil pauses for no apparent reason, allowing the moose head to crash down on him. Cleese has said he regrets this moment because the timing wasn't right. He wishes they had recognized what happened in the moment and done more takes until they got it right. But for the sake of making their day, they had to move on to the next shot. Cleese's peerage chances. According to Cleese, he has a couple more regrets when it comes to some big choices in his life. For starters, he admitted that he was once offered a peerage in 1999 from Patty Ashdown, the once Liberal Democrat leader. But rather than accept the peerage and enter into the House of Lords, Cleese said no. He said that Ashdown was going to offer him the peerage as he stepped down as the leader of the party, as a symbolic gesture. Cleese claimed he helped the party a great deal over the years, and this would simply have been a form of giving thanks to him, not because they thought he was going to be of particular help in the House of Lords. As such, he knew it wasn't a vital obligation to accept. But he also admitted in 2011 to the Mirror that the weather was also a factor. He tends to spend his winters in California to avoid the cold in England. He knew if he accepted the peerage, he'd have to stay in England for winter, an option he wasn't keen on. But in 2022, Cleese admitted on a Zoom interview that he now regrets not accepting Ashdown's offer. He also says he was offered a CBE in 1996. He referred to them as being silly, though it appears he does regret never being knighted. He was quoted as saying his biggest regret in life was not being knighted by the Queen. Said Cleese, "I should have been a knight, and I would have been knighted if I hadn't written one horrible Python sketch, which I deeply regret." The sketch he was referring to was called Upper Class Twit of the Year, which skewered upper-class British citizens, painting them as dim-witted and unaware. So clearly it was either communicated to Cleese that the sketch's content meant the Queen would never knight him, or he presumes that's the reason he was never knighted. Regardless, it clearly eats away at him now. The long-awaited third season. Fans of Fawlty Towers were thrilled to find out that a new third season is in production. In it, Basil Fawlty will be joined by his daughter to run an entirely new hotel in the Caribbean. And while there's general excitement about the show, there are also questions as to the type of content it'll include. In recent years, Cleese has spoken out about the dangers of so-called cancel culture and how it can have a negative effect on art. So many have presumed that the new season of Fawlty Towers will be filled with anti-woke sentiment. They've also presumed that Cleese, a pro-Brexit supporter, would inject some of that worldview into the show. But Cleese says the notion is nonsense. He joked that critics must know better than he does what the new episodes will contain. He sarcastically invited critics to write an episode that they would find acceptable. He joked that it perhaps wouldn't be funny, but their readers would enjoy it. Now it's time to hear from you. Are you excited at the prospect of a new season of Fawlty Tower, or should they let classic shows be left as they are without new modern takes? Let us know in the comments section below.